Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine Byers. I'm the Government Relations Officer at the Houston Food Bank, and I also have the privilege of being the sector representative for community feeding on the ACDA board. Today is ACDA in the hot seat, best practices for community feeding. For those of you who aren't aware, the American Commodity Distribution Association is a nonprofit professional association that's devoted to improving the distribution of food from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. What I love about ACDA is it includes members from across the supply chain. So agricultural organizations, recipient agencies such as schools, community feeding organizations like food banks, as well as industry groups such as food manufacturers and processors. So it's a really great opportunity for everybody to connect towards ACDA's vision, which is to nourish the nation, and its mission, which is to strengthen the impact of USDA food programs. And to achieve that mission and vision, we really need to make sure that the voices of experts are heard by decision makers at USDA, in Congress, and at the state level. You and the people you serve are the experts in how USDA food programs operate and how they meet the needs of community members. So I asked three of my colleagues to join us today in order to share their different experiences using their voices or advocating. So ideally, everyone who is touched by USDA foods can see their role in advocating for those foods getting to the community in the best way possible. So I'd like to get started with Emily. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background, what you do and what your food bank does?
Hi, happy to be here. My name is Emily Shearer. I'm the Senior Manager of Food Acquisition and Advocacy for the Food Bank of Iowa. We are located in Des Moines, Iowa, and serve 55 of Iowa's 99 counties. We have a good mix. Des Moines is obviously really densely populated, metro urban areas, but then also a lot of rural areas. So we have a good mix of your traditional food pantry partners, but also a lot of mobile pantries with a huge focus on school pantries. And so I've been here for 7 years. I recently took on more advocacy in my role just because I've recognized food acquisition is not quite cutting it for me anymore. We really do need good policy in order to help fight food insecurity. My background is a little unconventional. I have a bachelor's degree in fashion merchandising from Iowa State University. And I decided I didn't care about that as much. So I took a winding road and ended up at the food bank. I just buy food instead of clothing, and I prefer it that way. A little bit about Food Bank of Iowa. Our inventory, I talk about like a pie, and USDA plays a huge role in that. Traditionally, it makes up about 30% of our inventory, but with kind of the roller coaster of the last few years, at one point, it made up about 50 to 60% of our inventory, and now we're definitely seeing declines closer to even pre-trade mitigation levels back to about 20%. So it's been really interesting, and I'll kick it to Derek.
Thank you so much, and so happy to be here. Derek Polka, I'm the Senior Policy and Research Manager for the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. I've been in my position for about 4.5 years now, and I've been in food banking for another 4.5, so a total of about 9 years. Before this role, I was at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank, where I did CalFresh or SNAP outreach, so more on the programmatic side. But in this role, definitely a lot of my work is advocacy for food programs. So that includes commodities, but it also involves SNAP advocacy, as well as child nutrition, but also just general cost of living advocacy. In terms of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank, we serve all of LA County, so we serve all 500 square miles, and so that includes dense LA City, but it also includes the very rural areas in the northern sections of the county, in the Antelope Valley and in Santa Clarita and the valley up there. In terms of how we operate, we also receive about 30% of our food through USDA commodities. We've run one of the largest CSFP or the Commodity Supplemental Food Program in the nation, and we serve about 30,000 older adults per month. So in terms of just our work, we operate through about 600 different partners in LA County. And more recently, including with CSFP, we started home delivery. So that includes other partners like DoorDash and Amazon, helping with home deliveries and other innovations like that. I'd say in terms of other work the food bank does that people don't typically think about food banks doing, we've started doing diaper bank distributions, which has become a large part of our focus, as well as menstrual product distribution. So my advocacy has involved not just talking about food, but now involving health and other cost of living. So I'll leave it there, and I'll pass it back to you, Catherine.
I can jump in as well.
Yeah, please.
My name is Kira Mulligan. I manage our community partnerships here at Feeding Westchester, and I also took over the advocacy work. So we're new in this space, but we're learning really fast. Uniquely, Feeding Westchester is a food bank only serving one county. A lot of the Feeding America food banks serve large amounts of their states, similar to both Emily and Derek here, but we're specific to just Westchester. So we have a population about 1 million people. And just last year, we distributed 21 million pounds of food in our small county. A lot of that being the USDA TFAP foods, which we rely so heavily on. They're high quality foods that would be really expensive for us to purchase otherwise. So they make a huge difference in what we're able to serve our neighbors. So we're learning as we go, but I'm really enjoying this advocacy role, learning along the way, and so happy to be here.
So, Kiara, I'm curious if you could start us off with my next question, which is how would you define advocacy, right? If you were somebody who wasn't in this work at all, had never heard of it, and asked you what it is and why would a food bank be doing that? Doesn't a food bank just hand out food?
Right. That's a great question. And I always use the term when I'm speaking and learning is like, put it in Kira terms, because I'm not an expert in this space either. But to me, advocacy means using your voice where you can. So uniquely, food banks are given this opportunity to serve so many people, such a diverse group of people, where we see wraparound services needed everywhere, right? Like if you're going hungry, you need other services as well. And building those relationships with electeds gives us the opportunity to be like, hey, listen, like, let's work together, and we're giving you our feedback and voice. Like, let's see what we can do to make change. So at the very basic level, to me, advocacy is just using that voice, even if you don't know how.
Emily, what about you? What would your Emily definition be?
At my food bank, I call it going Emily. So going all Emily. So very similar to Kira's Kira terms, but echoing what she said too. I think it's just using your voice for people who can't speak up for themselves or who don't know how. It is really intimidating. And I think advocacy often gets muddied with lobbying, which I think automatically means like picketing at a courthouse or something like that. And that's not it at all. Like Kira said, again, it's educating. You are the expert in your role. I think too, something that I talk about is I don't want to be doing this work for the rest of my life. I love what I do. I'm very grateful to have a job I love, but I don't want to, it's really hard day in, day out. And I think COVID really highlighted that the gap is huge. It's not giving people food is not going to be enough. It really does need to start with good policy. People aren't excited to use food banks. They're not excited to use food pantries. So how can we, those who work with partners, which I think Kara does, and Derek, as an expert in the policy, and then I come from the food acquisition side, how can we use that perspective to advocate for better policy? Really, it sounds corny, but just to make a better life, a better world for everybody, for our communities.
In addition to going, Derek, I wonder, can you also speak to why you think advocacy is important specifically around the USDA food space, like TFAP and CSFP, maybe what you've seen since you have a longer tenure doing this work?
Yeah, no, I think, I would echo in terms of using your voice, and it's really uh, making sure to spotlight the work that is often it goes unnoticed. A lot of folks, would assume that, in terms of a food bank, it's just food drives where you collect cans and then distribute those cans. And I'd say all of our food banks, and I'd say, 99% of food banks, that's not the reality of the situation, and it's a lot more involved. So it's really highlighting not just voices, but also relationships in terms of how that distribution happens. A lot of people wouldn't assume that fruits and vegetables that we might be receiving at a food bank might be tied to the Department of Defense, and so really tying all of these really separate systems and making sure that they're highlighted and shown to be important, I think is just one of the key parts of why we're here, is just really, again, lending that voice to not just the hidden, but also the marginalized. I'd say all of us are really working with folks who are on the margins of society and who often are neglected. And so, we are here to represent them and at the same time benefit, our local economies and the nationwide economy as well.
And I'll take moderator privilege and add to that. Y'all, Emily, you mentioned, the folks on this call, right, are the experts. The folks listening to this are the experts. And the fact is, elected officials have to know something about everything, right? This is our day-to-day work. And so while elected officials may not always agree with the direction I'm telling them to go, they are very appreciative of the knowledge and of being able to even visit, right, a food bank or another partner to kind of see, well, what are my constituents experiencing? What does this look like on a day-to-day level? So they really are hungry for that information and want to learn it. I'm curious, Derek, we'll start with you. What have you seen? What are some areas where you feel advocacy has been effective, particularly in the USDA food space, whether it's specific initiatives or even if it's minor things? Because I often tell people, like, advocacy is a long game, right? It takes a long time to see change, but sometimes it's one elected official visiting with one neighbor, right, and getting a light bulb moment. So do you have anything like that to share from your experience?
Yeah, I think in terms of the whole system that I was describing before, in terms of how the nation runs and how agriculture gets to folks, I think one key part of our advocacy that has really worked is really showing how critical we are in that food infrastructure. I feel that before, even especially before the pandemic, there just wasn't as much attention to put on just how critical food banks are in communities. And as you said, a lot of constituents are talking to their representatives, but they might not be talking to their representatives about food banks. It's just that part of that inherent care economy that often just gets overlooked. So I'd say just that visibility is a huge part of advocacy wins. Just having folks recognize that TFAP exists, and not just assuming that, again, that we're just getting cans and distributing those, is a big win there. And then I think also in terms of really being seen as a critical role in stabilizing the agriculture economy, and this is getting in the weeds, but with trade mitigation and bonus, it's known as bonus TFAP product, we've really taken food that would just otherwise be wasted and put it back into the economy and into people's homes. So I think that elevating that part of our work has also been really critical in winning over some legislators who, again, might just see us as a charity that doesn't need support from the government. But I think we've really highlighted how critical for all of our food banks, USDA, TFAP, and CSFP, and all the commodity funding is.
Kara, I want to turn to you next. I wanted to add on that for those who are watching this who aren't food banks, I think the other thing that we can do together is demonstrate how complex all this is. I've had, I don't know about y'all, but quite a few elected officials who are like, you can't just go to the shelf, put it in a bag and put it in somebody's trunk. And it's like, whoa, the ripples in the supply chain, right, impacted us as well. And when, we don't have enough, when USDA doesn't have enough funding for certain commodities, that impacts, right, our American farmers, our American businesses. So just in case you're about to hop off and say, this doesn't concern me at all, stay. It does. We need you. But I'm curious if you and I had a conversation not too long ago about sort of a vision of advocacy and what you'd like to do. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, since you're really in those early stages, because, and I told y'all this in the prep to this, I don't want folks on here going, oh, these people are doing it full time, they've got all these resources, this isn't something I can engage in. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like to say I'm a one-man team. I do get support, but I'm the only person that's dedicating portions of their job role at this moment. So we're really trying to, in these beginning stages, lay it all out and say, like, what's realistic, right? So advocacy could be so big and so intimidating, but what do we know we can accomplish and do it effectively and see results from? So one thing that we've gathered is every time we meet with an elected official, you can give them these numbers and try to paint this picture for them. And they get it that way, but the only thing that really changes their view or that they bring back to their colleagues is lived experiences. So we really want to focus on highlighting our neighbors, their experiences, their stories, even if they're not comfortable sharing them face to face with our electeds. How can we do that for them? Because a story I always love to tell is I went to one of our mobile food pantries and this woman was looking at a birthday cake we got through our retail recovery program. And finally I said to her, please take it. And she said, today's my birthday actually, and I didn't think I was going to have a birthday cake. And that stuck with me, and it sticks with people I share that story with. And I always make sure I plug that in with our electeds too, because like Derek mentioned, I think a lot of people think we're just giving out cans of food. But this produce that we're giving out, this TFAP food we're giving out, these retail items that we get through here really do make such a difference. And it's those stories that our electeds are going to bring to the floor with them and share. So one of my ideas and goals long-term is to create sort of like a round table or a group or an advisory board of neighbors where we can go to all the time to be like, listen, we have this meeting. What are you seeing on the ground? What are you hearing from your friends and family that are also attending these distributions? Like, how is this funding that might be cut going to affect you and your day-to-day? Because that's really what we're hearing. I mean, folks who had their SNAP benefits cut to $23 a month, there's just no way that they can make ends meet with that. So when we hear those stories, it's easy for us to say, now we feel more confident to go into these elected meetings. We have our data to share, but we also have neighbors that are giving us this information. So I think that is something, although we're starting small and we're early, we're really prioritizing those lived experience stories.
Thank you for sharing that. Emily, can you talk about what some of the challenges and successes, even small, that you've had advocating around USDA foods like TFAP and CSFP?
Yeah, so Derek and Kira have both said so many good things, so I feel like I want to build on what they are saying. But I would say one of the biggest challenges, specifically as a food bank, is having to remain neutral on a lot of things. I think I always say personal Emily and professional Emily are different people. I will say they are elected officials. Even if you don't align with them, you do have to respect them. I feel like meeting them in person is really helpful because I'm like, oh, you are just another human being, and like your kid also yells at you when you're at the grocery store because they want to buy fruit snacks, and like, how can I find this commonality with you? So it is really helpful to meet somebody face to face. so challenges, the neutral, like Catherine said, it is a long game. I mean, to me, sometimes I'm like, there's no way I'm not going to give them this impact report, and they're going to be like, holy cow, we need to fix something. Let me go get my pen and paper right now. Like, it definitely doesn't work that way. And I still like get really hopeful sometimes. So it is a long game, building that relationship, but some successes are building the relationships. I do the same thing with food donors, but I'm kind of working on how can I get you into my food bank? How can I let you see the scale at which we operate? I think food banks and food pantries are used interchangeably a lot. And before I started here, I had no idea the difference. So I think inviting people in, we have a state senator and a state representative who are both veterans, and we operate 2 veterans only mobiles. And so I did some targeted outreach. I did invite them in, and I think finding that, like, oh, they're a veteran, like, let's let them see the veteran mobile, like, let's talk about the impact we make on veterans, and finding that that commonality with them, that's been a small success. And then also just finding those contact people too, like whenever you can find the staffer. I know I'm not going to get our senator on the phone all the time, but I can email their staffer and be like, hey, did you see this? Hey, can I invite so-and-so to this? Something like that's always a win. It's just having that contact person that you can reach out to and extend those invitations.
What do you think is, and Derek, maybe you can start us off, are some things that people, particularly elected officials, really don't know about TFAP or CSFP? I mean, sometimes, I think you pointed out, or sometimes they don't even know it exists. They're like, T what? So it's very common to all of us, right? But I guess some things that either the impact they have or how they operate that maybe people don't realize.
Yeah, great question. I'd say a few things. I just had a meeting yesterday with a state elected, and they were asking, they've been in this, it was a staffer, and they've been in the role for a bit. So I'm surprised we hadn't engaged before. But they asked, how do your services work? Do people have to pay to receive the food? Can they use EBT? And I just explained, no, like all of our food is it's donated, or we purchased it with donated funds so that people could get it for free. And then explain some of the nuances in terms of eligibility. But yeah, I'd say it ranges from that to understanding a lot of the complexity and the nuances, and really digging into what are some ways we can make this program more effective. I mentioned CSFP. There's currently an initiative to allow for what was originally just a pilot at many food banks, but it's now a bill that would allow for CSFP home deliveries. So that required a lot of relationship management and just bringing in those external partners who have, pretty big lobby teams. Those are actual lobbyists versus, advocates. But also say that we involved them and got them engaged with some of the advocacy work we were doing. And I think now we're starting to really get at something that a lot of folks have thought was just not possible, which is home delivery for commodities. Yeah, I'd say it in terms of those engagements and how deep or how shallow those relationships are, it's just continuous engagement. I think just keeping that up and keeping them aware of what's on the ground. And I think really the scale is the other huge thing. I don't think I've mentioned that we went from serving about 300,000 people per month to now 900,000 people per month. So that's about 1 in 10 LA residents. And so just having them not understand just how many folks in LA are really struggling has always been something that it's hard to make them understand at first, because low unemployment and the economy tending to be well at the national level, we're serving, again, the folks that are in the margins. So we're seeing the people that are truly struggling at the moment. And I think that's always something that they just aren't aware of, is, just because we overall as an economy are doing okay, it doesn't mean that people at the bottom are also doing okay. Actually, they're really struggling, especially now.
Kara, I'm curious. We were doing a video around TFAP not too long ago, and man, it took me the longest time to be like, how do I make this sound interesting, right? Because to us, we understand the importance, but how do you help folks understand, particularly our electeds, the importance of TFAP? I mean, just the critical nature. I mean, we all talked, we're in like what, the 20, maybe low 30% of USDA commodities in general, which sounds small, but I tell you, we'd be in, food banks would be in big trouble if those disappeared. So anyway, I'm curious how you explain the importance, particularly of TFAP to elected officials.
So we actually did some DC meetings back in September. We did the fly-in with Feeding America, and this was to advocate for the Farm Bill. And a lot of what we focused on was TFAP funding. And the way we communicated this to our electeds was the TFAP food we get is high quality. It's the produce, it's the animal proteins, it's dairy. This is all food that allows us to put our money into purchasing other foods at bulk. So without that TFAP food, we wouldn't be able to give that high quality and the amount of that high quality food that we're getting in through that program. Once you tell electeds, like, it affects people's health, right? So that they care about their constituents' health. If they're not getting these high quality fresh produce items, we wouldn't survive without TFAP. I mean, it's just every food bank, I think, feels that way. We had some other food banks join us in those meetings to communicate that same message. And I think when they hear it from a few different people at the same time, it makes them understand more as well. But we really just rely on that food. And I think even our donors and our community partners telling them about TFAP. And we're really proud to say that 40% of our distributed food is fresh produce, and they love hearing that. And that's a lot to credit TFAP foods.
And how many what's kind of the numbers around the folks that you're serving right now?
Each month, it's averaged 220,000 visits from neighbors. So pre-pandemic, we were serving about half of that, but we've remained high increased need, and it's just getting worse. High cost of living, everybody's seeing this. One thing that's difficult as well, kind of going back to your last question, is advocating for hunger is really difficult because each year you're asking for the same thing. And how do you make that different? How do you make that ask seem more real? So you really have to get creative because, we don't see the end. Everything is so expensive right now. Folks that never needed services or a food pantry line are showing up at food pantries in our community. So I think it's just, it all works together, but it's hard.
Emily, what are your numbers looking like?
So I don't have as much visibility on our pantry visits, but I know each month we're distributing more and more pounds. I'm definitely in the food distribution space. So I know when I first started here, and granted that was like a whole lifetime ago, we thought distributing 1 million pounds a month would be like a really great goal. And now we regularly distribute 1.5 million pounds of food, knowing we could distribute more. But at what point are we maxing out our trucks? Your drivers can only be on the road so often. To Kira's point, I say we're buying more for more. And so food is just more expensive. I see it at the store myself, and TFAP fills in. I mean, it's the emergency food assistance program, but I feel like emergency should be bold and underlined, maybe double line, underlined and highlighted, because it fills such a critical gap when you're serving that many more people. When your funding's not going as far, just having those, we get a lot of staple items. So your pasta sauce, your rice, your beans. It's where we get some culturally responsive items, kosher halal peanut butter and tomato sauce. And just to be able to have a couple offerings that we know will fill a gap. that we're not able to elsewhere is that's helpful. So numbers, I mean, like to Kara and Derek's point, there's not a huge end in sight, and food insecurity is just one part of that puzzle. So it's really hard to talk about that with also being like, but childcare and housing and healthcare and transportation, and it's all just part of this tapestry.
Thank you for that. I know y'all had given in the beginning kind of about the percentage of your USDA commodities or your, do y'all find a lot of food bank revenue going to purchased? I mean, or has that become like a kind of greater need as the need has grown? Derek, you're nodding your head most vigorously, so I'll pick you first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd say purchasing has definitely increased exponentially this past few years. 2020, we saw a lot of extra commodities coming through, and so that really helped us meet the just huge jump in need. Again, going from 300,000 to I think at the time it was about 800,000, but now we're serving 100,000 on top of that, with about half of the foods we saw that year. So definitely now we're filling it in with purchased food. I'd say in California we're pretty lucky in that just last year we had implementation of SB 1383, which is a food waste reduction bill, and so a lot of extra food that would normally go to landfills, it's being rescued before it expires and being sent to food banks, and so we've seen a boost of food there, and so our purchasing hasn't had to jump as extreme as other food banks in other states, but are definitely looking at cost cutting and just making it very efficient and becoming a bit leaner to make sure that we're meeting all 900,000 folks we're serving, while at the same time not burning out our staff, and all while managing the very complex system that is just food distribution.
Emily or Gerard, any comments about that?
I could build off. I can't speak to exact purchasing just because I don't live on the operations side of our world. But I will build off of what Derek was saying. We really rely on our retail recovery program as well. It's really great. And we rescued 3.5 million pounds of food last year. So we are really grateful to our retail recovery partners throughout the county. That really gives us a boost, especially since, some of those emergency food things that were in place during the pandemic have come to an end. So the retail recovery came right in for us and really helped us out. And also there's a really great part of that program that gets like, the fun stuff from Trader Joe's that our neighbors love to see. So it gives a little bit of fun stuff to our distributions as well.
So I pulled these numbers. They're over a year old, but I still think, the message is still clear and it's still happening. So in calendar year 21, we purchased about 6% of our food. And now in 2022, it was to 27%. And now I'm sure even in 2023, it's a little bit higher than that. So when I started, I mentioned this at the beginning, USDA made up, 20 to 30% of our food. And then at the highlight of the pandemic, it was 50 to 60%, which with truly, it was milk, eggs, produce, meat, all the most expensive things that you see at the store. We were able to fill in those gaps with that TFAP food. And now, this year, it's back down to pre-pandemic levels, pre-trade mitigation levels, and our purchasing is, about 30%. Like I said, it's more for more. And so I had a thought and I lost it. So somebody else can keep going.
That happens to me regularly. I will say, I bring that up for two reasons. Well, for one reason and not for another reason. But one reason is that, I want folks who are watching this to have a good sense of, how food banks are moving and shaking to pull all these pieces together. I don't bring it up to say, USDA commodities aren't enough. I mean, in a way they aren't, but the point is nothing can ever be enough if we aren't advocating for larger change. I think Secretary Vilsack has really done an amazing job trying to innovate, trying to do what he can without, that's within his purview. And a lot of the innovative programs that he's been able to continue, like the local food purchase agreement, even after those ARPA funds diminished, to continue to try and push that, where you really are serving like hyper local, marginalized, farmers and producers, making that connection, that teamwork with food banks. I mean, that's to me, that kind of coordination and collaboration is what it's going to take on the food side for USDA to do more. I mean, there's the things you learn in this job, right? So I learned when tuna fell off the TFAP list, we only have one domestic tuna producer, right? Like there's no control over that's it. And so, figuring out how we kind of manage and create new relationships, I think is really important. I'm curious what kind of y'all mentioned some food rescue programs. Do any of y'all have relationships with other, I'll say, supply chain stakeholders? So like processors, farmers, relationships where y'all have been able to really dig into the work and maybe even possibly do some advocacy together? Derek or Emily or whoever wants to.
I'll jump in. So yeah, Catherine mentioned LFPA, Local Foods Purchasing Assistance. So it's working really, really well in Iowa. And a couple of things, I do local purchasing outside of that. Even without LFPA funding, we purchase produce from a local African immigrant farmer, and potatoes from an Iowa potato vendor, and tortillas from a maker like right down the street. So knowing that we're doing that work, but also it's been really eye-opening other parts of the food system. So and climate change has come into that conversation as well. Like, why is food so expensive? I think people have the desire to eat local food, local being locally grown, locally processed within the state. And why is it so expensive? Well, I learned it's because farmers don't have health benefits. They don't have some of these other support systems in place. So can food banks be a part of that discussion? That's kind of that's another part of advocacy, is just talking about the importance for a healthy food system. How can it work within your state?
Yeah, I can jump in as well and build off of that. In terms of well, I'll just say in California, we are lucky to be a huge producing state. And so we have Cal Food, which is essentially what LFPA is, but just statewide, where it's funds to connect food banks with farmers throughout the state to keep, California grown produce and dairy and other products within the state and given out to people at food banks. So I think, LFPA has built in nicely there. And our state association handles most of that relationship building, but I'll say that in this past year, I think especially throughout the pandemic, we have sought out more relationships with producers. And on the more advocacy side, I've started participating in a statewide or a state coalition for regional food systems. So trying to build out, power mapping, and then some basically a strategic plan to involve just statewide advocacy on creating more regional hubs, which I think the USDA is moving towards. And I think we're just really hoping to guide it to be move in an equitable way. It involves a lot of indigenous farming groups and other just folks that wouldn't normally be, invited to the table. So really trying to build out that work so that we're including more voices as well.
Yeah, and I'll jump in as well. We don't do specific advocacy outreach with stakeholders per se, but similarly, we have a program here with the state called Nourish New York, where the state gives us funding to purchase directly from New York State farmers, and that's a win-win. We haven't had any issues with it. It's amazing. It supports our farmers here in the state and gets amazing produce to our neighbors. So we're grateful for that as well.
How, are there things you'd like to see in the future, like relationships you'd like to see develop with other supply chain stakeholders? I'll say start with the Houston Food Bank, in that, you know, we our procurement department, great relationships, right, with our farmers, our retail donors. And then we have our government relations department, and it's like trying to connect with the right folks, right, who aren't necessarily doing the procurement, but are able to like have conversations with elected officials. And there's just, to me, so much potential there. And that's, I think I said this in the beginning, why I was so excited to be part of the ACDA board, is that this is an organization, an association that brings all those parties together around that common purpose. And so I'm curious, are there communications opportunities that y'all would, you know, be excited about, that you'd really the connections you'd like to make with other parts of the supply chain that are all part of this USDA commodity journey?
I mean, like the easy, regular Kira answer for me is definitely, I think, because we're in the early stages, there's no bad connection, and we're all working to make our communities better. So I always jump on the chance to be connected to somebody new, to speak through ideas or listen to what their priorities might be and how it aligns with ours, and that how we can find common ground and work together. So that's my Kira version answer.
Similar to Kira, since I'm so new to this, any connection is a good connection. I think just being thought of, like, hey, I have a question about how this thing is working. Like, I'm going to email Emily, or I'm going to call Emily, or text Emily, or something. Just being thought of in that way. Something that I also attended the fly-in in September, and something I tried to highlight, and I wish there was more data or talking points around it, is how mutually beneficial the TFAP program is. I mean, yes, it fills this huge gap for the food banks. It makes my job easier and more complicated, you know, in some ways. But I think if there were more talking points about this supports United States agriculture, you know, I don't feel like there's enough of a highlight. I worry sometimes it gets wrapped into other food banks are just asking for more money. They're just asking for this. And yes, but I'm also asking for you to support our agricultural economy because, you know, I mean, Iowa's a hugely agricultural, I mean, that's what we're known for. And people will always say, like, well, you're surrounded by food. Well, it's, you know, for those of you outside of Iowa, it's soybeans and field corn. So, like, not human food. So, I mean, we still need assistance too. But by supporting these programs, you're supporting our agricultural economy, the United States agricultural economy, because if we keep having these issues, those farmers could end up in our lines, and that's not anything we want to see. I think we've highlighted it's getting more challenging to add to our lines. So I wish there was more talking points around how impactful the TFAP program is outside of just for food banks.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that point there. You know, last year, I think alone, we saw $1 billion in investments from the White House and USDA for the local food purchasing agreements, and then it's some investments in infrastructure. And so, you know, it's really the backbone of a lot of the nation. And I know pretty much every county has a food bank, so pretty much every county is receiving food through this program. So I'd agree that there just needs to be just a better emphasis on what the value is, not just for food banks, but also for the economy. And on the flip side of that, I'd say a relationship that I think is building, but I'd love to see, you know, grow quicker, is the nutrition space and health is medicine. I think there's a lot of opportunity there of connecting, dietary outcomes with, the fresh produce and the fresh, products that you can receive through USDA. So just being able to connect the direct food distribution with more, evaluations on are these food pantries, changing people's lives. And I'd say some food banks are already showing that work. I think it's the Greater Cleveland Food Bank that has very specific data on providing people fresh produce, increasing their health, and tying it pretty directly. So I'd say, getting that, health, and then also just research and again, just showing the impact of the work. So, on the economic side, but then also just the human value side in terms of really helping people in their time of need. So economists and doctors, I guess, are the two people I'd like to see more involved.
Yeah, and I definitely think, Emily, what you said about illustrating the connections, that there are people's jobs who depend on this, the nutritious food and produce that people get enables, truck drivers and farmers and, to be able to work, for their kids to go to school. There are farmers who are food insecure, right? And so bringing those voices together and being able to illustrate those connections, I think is really important for all of us to do. And something, I know ACDA, the more and more the community feeding kind of sector grows in ACDA, the more I think it really is incumbent on us to dive into those relationships, because there's interest there and possibility, advocacy, but also on the programmatic level. Sorry, not programmatic level, but opportunities for food banks to enter into relationships, right, with other members of the supply chain. I want to see if y'all have any sort of wrap up comments, things you really want people to know about advocacy. I feel like, I know at first Emily and Kiara in particular were like, "You're inviting me to do what?" But having had conversations with both of you, what I really wanted, the reason I felt like this was best practice is because each of you are doing something, right? You're building it. You recognize the importance of it. And to me, advocacy should be a best practice, right, in all of our work. So that's why I wanted all three of you on here. So do y'all have any sort of final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah,
Derek,
I'd love to
go
say, oh, sorry. I'd love to just remind everybody that it doesn't have to be all the time. Like, create 3 bullet points that maybe can help guide you or bring you back, because advocacy can be confusing and overwhelming at some times. But the important part is to always just ask any question. Find somebody in the network that you can build off of, learn from, bounce ideas off of. That's how I met Catherine, and feel good about that advocacy work you're doing, even if it's really teeny tiny. There's no bad result from using your voice or exploring in this space. And I think even having the idea of doing advocacy or being curious about it to begin with is a step in the right direction. So don't feel overwhelmed and take it step by step.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that point in terms of, I'd say a lot of the work is relationship building and relationship management. And I'd say, the majority of folks are pretty good at that at some level. And so it's just checking in and keeping people updated on, this is what our food bank is doing, and this is how you can help. It sounds like you would have to bring in every single piece of data and information to have that conversation. But oftentimes it's really just, this is our work, and this is how you can help. And like Kira said, it's like a few bullet points. You don't want to bring in a ton of knowledge because that won't be fruitful for anyone. And probably be boring for a lot of folks. So yeah, I'd say just really instead of putting advocacy on a pedestal, understand that most people are advocating every day for a lot of things, and it's just not labeled advocacy. So it hopefully people at least from are able to at least take away a little bit in terms of it seems intimidating, but it's actually something that people do every day, and hopefully more people are able to get involved.
Honestly, echoing everything Derek and Kira just said, find your person. I found Catherine. I don't know if she feels good about that or not, but I found her and I have her email and her cell phone number. But yeah, just ask questions, and you are the expert in your work. Like Catherine said early on, they can't know everything about everything, and they are, I mean, the people you're talking about with that elected official, those are their constituents. They should care. And so if you frame it, these are your constituents, these are the people in your community. So I think, and it doesn't have to be flying into DC and wearing a power suit, even though that's super fun. I think it's inviting people into your food bank, finding a distribution that aligns with their schedule. It's also, relationship building for sure. I think one of the ways you could maybe stand out, and it would be really easy for me to be like, email them, be like, what were you thinking? Why did you say this? Somebody I probably wouldn't vote for introduced a bill about Narcan accessibility. That's hugely important. It really doesn't have anything to do with my job, but I sent an email that was like, hey, thank you for advocating for this. This is super important. Say thank you for things. It doesn't have to always be like, I need you to vote this way, blah, blah, blah. So I'm rambling, but relationship building, step by step, it's hard. We don't have a dedicated advocacy person. I just wanted to do it, and I've been given that opportunity to do as much as I can. If you're not a dedicated advocacy person, yeah, just finding that little thing, sending out a newsletter, making it, sending an email or something like that can be hugely impactful.
I will also add, as a, of course, plug for ACDA, is one of the resources of ACDA is that there are, we have sector leads, and so I'm the lead for community feeding. We have regular meetings. You can come with your, not just things you want to elevate to elected officials, but things you want to elevate and advocate for with USDA, right? With FNS, with your state agencies. There are commonalities, but there are also opportunities to learn about flexibilities that USDA allows you, but your state maybe doesn't for whatever reason. And so there are advocacy opportunities there as well. And that is also about relationship building. State and federal agencies take a lot of beatings, but they are very well-intentioned, hardworking folks who need our support, right? And who want to do the right thing. And so they need to hear about what the challenges are, as well as potential solutions. And so ACDA kind of provides you that communication channel. If you happen to be viewing this and you aren't a member of ACDA, or you are and haven't been to the conference, I definitely encourage you to check that out on the ACDA website. It's going to be in St. Louis, April 21st. It is an amazing opportunity to connect with folks and to connect with folks who then you never leave alone. Like, hi, Derek. And so, and across sector too. We are going to have something on advocacy there. So hopefully y'all be there. Also for food banks, ACDA's entered into a new partnership with Feeding America. And so Feeding America members will get early bird registration throughout the registration fee. Throughout the registration period. So yeah, there's a lot of great work that we can do together. And everybody has a voice, so they just need to step into it, realize they have it, and step into it. So I don't think I haven't gotten any other questions, because we are just so darn informative and amazing. People are like, I have nothing to ask you. But if you have questions about any of this or about anything else ACDA, You can email info@commodityfoods.org. That's info@commodityfoods.org. We thank you for viewing this today. I think my panelists, I think y'all are amazing. And I'm happy that you were able to take some time to inform and inspire other advocates.
Thanks for
Yeah,
thinking
thank
of
you for
us,
having
Catherine.
us. Yeah.